The gunshot that killed Sarah Calloway's husband had been accidental, fired by a ranch hand cleaning a rifle in the spring of 1887. But the loneliness that followed had been deliberate, chosen, worn like a second skin she couldn't shed. By the autumn of 1889, she had made peace with solitude on her sheep ranch outside Miles City, Montana Territory, where the wind never stopped and the grass stretched yellow and endless under a sky too big for comfort. Harrison Grady rode in on a Tuesday, sent by the livestock company to help with the autumn shearing. 26 years old, with a smile that belonged in a saloon and hands that knew their way around sheep better than most men twice his age. Sarah was 38, her face carved by sun and wind into something handsome rather than pretty, her dark hair threaded with silver she didn't bother to hide. She hired him on the spot because she needed the help and because he didn't flinch when he saw the scope of work ahead. The shearing took a week. Harrison worked dawn to dusk alongside her two other hands, steady and uncomplaining, and she caught him watching her more than once with an expression she couldn't quite read. On the last evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon and the newly shorn sheep milled in their pens, he found her by the water trough, washing the lanolin from her hands. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, hat in his hands, "I was wondering if you might consider letting me stay on through winter. I'm good with repairs, and I noticed your lambing pens need reinforcement before spring." She dried her hands on her apron, studying him. "Winter wages are slim. Most men prefer town work when the cold sets in. I'm not most men, I've noticed." She turned back to the trough. "You've also been watching me like a lovesick calf for 3 days running, Mr. Grady, and I'll tell you now what I'd tell any man fool enough to think that way. Love is for younger women. You're wasting your charm on the wrong person." The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might have walked away. Then she heard the soft sound of his boots on the packed earth as he stepped closer. "Then I'll wait for you to get younger," he said, his voice light but not mocking. He settled his hat back on his head, tipped it to her, and walked off toward the bunkhouse, whistling a tune she didn't recognize. Sarah stood frozen by the trough, water dripping from her fingers, uncertain whether to laugh or throw something at his retreating back. He stayed. She told herself it was because she needed the help, because the pens really did need work, because winter on a Montana sheep ranch was brutal enough without being short-handed. Harrison moved into the bunkhouse with Tom and Samuel, her two regular hands, and set about fixing everything that needed fixing with a cheerfulness that seemed impervious to the dropping temperatures and her deliberate coolness. The first snow came in early November, soft flakes that turned the ranch into something from a dream. Sarah woke to find Harrison already in the barn, mucking stalls and singing something under his breath. She stood in the doorway, coffee cup warming her hands, and watched him work. He had stripped down to his shirt sleeves despite the cold, and there was an economy to his movements that spoke of years doing exactly this kind of work. "You're up early," she said. He glanced over his shoulder, grinning. "So are you. It's my ranch. True enough." He leaned on his pitchfork. "Coffee smells good from here. There's more in the house. Is that an invitation?" She hesitated, then nodded. "For coffee, nothing more." "Wouldn't dream of it, madam." They sat at her kitchen table, the silence broken only by the crackling of the stove and the wind rattling the windows. Harrison wrapped his hands around his cup and looked at her with those steady gray eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to show. "How long were you married?" he asked. 8 years. "You never had the privilege." "It wasn't always a privilege," she said, then immediately regretted the honesty. "Robert was a good man. He deserved better than what happened. I heard it was an accident. Doesn't make him any less dead." She stood, collecting their cups though they were still half full. The sheep need checking, Sarah. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it stopped her cold. I'm not trying to replace anyone, he said quietly. I just think you're about the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I'd like the chance to know you better. That's all. I'm too old for you. You're 12 years older. My own parents had 10 years between them. It's different when the woman is older. Why? She had no good answer for that, so she grabbed her coat and went out into the snow. Winter deepened, and Harrison kept showing up. Not in the way she had feared, with pressing advances or wounded pride, but in small, persistent ways that wore down her defenses like water on stone. He fixed the lambing pens as promised, reinforcing the walls and building new gates that swung smooth and true. He argued with her about everything from the best way to prevent foot rot to whether the Book of Ruth was really a love story or something darker. His voice passionate and alive in a way that made her realize how quiet her life had become. Ruth followed Naomi out of loyalty, not love, Sarah insisted one evening in December, the Bible open between them on her kitchen table. She was being a good daughter. And then she married Boaz, Harrison countered. That's the point of the whole story. Loyalty led to love. You're reading romance into scripture. You're reading cynicism into everything. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. When did you decide love was finished for you? When I buried my husband. That's grief, not a decision. It's both. She closed the Bible with more force than necessary. You should go. Morning comes early. He went, but he came back the next night and the night after that, always with some excuse about needing to discuss the ewes or check the feed inventory, always staying just long enough to make her laugh despite herself. She started looking forward to those evenings, started putting on a clean shirt before supper and brushing out her hair. The realization that she was falling for him came like a punch to the gut. Unwanted and undeniable. Christmas came and went in a blur of church services and quiet gifts. Harrison gave her a book of poetry by Walt Whitman, which scandalized her even as she read every page twice. She gave him new gloves, practical and impersonal, and saw the flash of disappointment in his eyes before he smiled and thanked her. January brought bitter cold and the first signs of trouble. She was in town buying supplies when Martha Henderson, the minister's wife, cornered her outside the general store. Sarah, dear, I feel I must speak as a friend, Martha said, her voice dripping false concern. People are talking about you and that young cowboy of yours. Sarah's hands tightened on her basket. Mr. Grady is an employee, nothing more. Of course, dear. But appearances matter, especially for a widow. A woman of your age with a man his age living on the same property. People wonder. Let them wonder. I'm only thinking of your reputation. Sarah looked at Martha's pinched, satisfied face and felt something snap inside her. My reputation survived being widowed at 36. I expect it will survive employing a competent ranch hand. Good day, Martha. She drove the wagon home through the snow, Martha's words echoing in her head. A woman of your age. The phrase felt like a brand, marking her as past her prime, ridiculous for wanting anything beyond work and church and slow decline. By the time she reached the ranch, she had made up her mind. Harrison was in the barn, checking on a ewe that was off her feed. Sarah found him kneeling in the straw, his hands gentle on the animal's swollen belly. She'll lamb early, he said without looking up. Next few weeks, I'd guess. I need to speak with you. Something in her tone made him stand. All right, she forced herself to meet his eyes. This arrangement isn't working. I'll pay you through the end of the month, but I think it's best if you find other employment come February. The color drained from his face. Did I do something wrong? No, you've been an excellent worker. Then why? Because people are talking, and I won't have my reputation dragged through the mud by gossip. Since when do you care what people say? since I realized how foolish I've been." The words came out harsher than she intended. "You're young enough to be starting your life. I'm old enough to know better than to make a fool of myself over a man 12 years my junior." Harrison took a step toward her, then stopped. "Is that what you think? That you're making a fool of yourself? I know I am. You're wrong." His voice was rough with emotion. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who runs a ranch that would break most men. I see someone who reads poetry and argues scripture and isn't afraid to work until her hands bleed. I see the person I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. I don't care about 12 years, I care about you. You'll change your mind." "No, I won't. In 10 years you'll be 36 and I'll be nearly 50. You'll want children, a young wife, things I can't give you. Did I ask you for any of that?" He was angry now, truly angry, and somehow that made it worse. "Have I ever once made you feel like you weren't enough exactly as you are?" She couldn't answer because the truth was he hadn't. Every moment with him had made her feel seen, valued, alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. And that terrified her more than anything. "I want you to leave," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, I'll go. But I need you to know something first. I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You're not too old. You're not ridiculous. You're the woman I love, and sending me away won't change that." He walked past her out of the barn, and she stood among the sheep and the straw, listening to his footsteps fade, knowing she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, Harrison was gone. He'd left his wages on the kitchen table with a note that said only, "If you change your mind, I'll be at the Stockman Hotel in town." Tom and Samuel exchanged glances but said nothing, working around the hollow silence he'd left behind. Sarah threw herself into work, rising before dawn and collapsing exhausted each night. February came in hard, bringing storms that buried the ranch in snow and tested every repair Harrison had made. The reinforced lambing pens held. The new gates swung true. Everywhere she looked, she saw the evidence of his care, his attention, his quiet devotion. The ewe he'd worried about went into labor on a night when the wind howled like a living thing. Sarah spent hours in the barn, helping the animal deliver twin lambs that came out slick and perfect in the lamplight. She cleaned them and watched them struggle to their feet, their mother nosing them gently, and she thought about new beginnings and second chances, and all the things she'd told herself she didn't deserve. Tom found her there at dawn, still sitting in the straw with the lambs. "You look like hell, Mrs. Calloway," he said, not unkindly. "Thank you, Tom. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear." He settled onto a hay bale, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "You going to tell me why you ran off the best hand we've had in years, or am I supposed to pretend I don't have eyes? It's complicated. Seems pretty simple to me. He loved you, you loved him, you got scared and sent him packing." She looked up sharply. "I'm too old for him. My Sarah was 6 years older than me when we married. God rest her soul, we had 20 good years before the fever took her." He lit his cigarette, the match flare bright in the dim barn. "Age is just numbers. What matters is whether two people fit together, whether they make each other better." "That boy made you laugh again. Haven't heard you laugh like that since Mr. Robert died. What if he changes his mind? What if he wakes up one day and realizes he's wasted his youth on an old woman? What if he doesn't? What if you waste the rest of your life being scared when you could be happy?" The lambs bleated, hungry and new, and Sarah felt something inside her chest crack open. She rode into Miles City that afternoon, the streets churned to mud by melting snow. The Stockman Hotel was a 2-story building near the railroad depot, respectable but worn. The clerk told her Harrison had a room on the 2nd floor, and she climbed the stairs with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She knocked on the door of room 7. Nothing. She knocked again harder and finally heard movement inside. Harrison opened the door in his shirt sleeves, his hair mussed, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Sarah." "May I come in?" He stepped back, and she entered the small, neat room. A single bed, a washstand, his few belongings packed and ready to go. She turned to face him, words catching in her throat. "I was wrong," she said finally. "I've been wrong about so many things, but mostly I was wrong to send you away." "Why did you?" "Because I was scared. Because Martha Henderson and half the town think I'm making a fool of myself, and part of me believed them. Because I looked at you and saw all the things you could have with someone younger, and I couldn't understand why you'd choose me instead." Harrison closed the distance between them in 2 strides. "You want to know why? Because you're brilliant and stubborn and strong enough to build a life out of nothing. Because you challenge me and frustrate me and make me want to be better. Because when I imagine my future, the only thing I see clearly is you. I'm scared I won't be enough. You're scared I won't stay. That's different." He took her hands, his calloused palms warm against hers. "Sarah, I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not in 10 years, not ever. You're not too old. You're exactly right, and I've known that since the first day I saw you standing in your work clothes with mud on your boots, telling me how you wanted things done. You must have thought I was a terror. I thought you were magnificent." She laughed, the sound breaking free like something caged finally set loose. "I've missed you. The ranch is too quiet without you arguing with me about scripture and tracking mud through my kitchen. Come back with me, please. We'll do it right this time. I'll court you properly, let everyone in Miles City see that I'm serious about this, about you. And when you're ready, if you're ready, I'll marry you in front of God and everyone. People will talk. Let them. I don't care about people. I care about you." She looked at him, this man who had waited patiently while she ran from her own heart, who had never once tried to change her or make her feel less than she was. She thought about Tom's words, about wasting time being scared when she could be happy, about the lambs born new this morning and the spring that was coming. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and she felt 12 years and a lifetime of worry dissolve into something simpler and truer than she'd ever imagined possible. The courtship that followed was the talk of Miles City through the rest of the winter and into spring. Harrison came to church with her every Sunday, sat in the pew beside her with his hat on his knee, and ignored the stares and whispers. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, where they ate roast chicken and argued amiably about whether Shakespeare had ever written anything as good as the Song of Solomon. He helped her with the spring lambing, working beside her through long nights when the ewes labored, and the new lambs came slippery and bleeding into the world. Martha Henderson made her disapproval known at every opportunity, but others surprised Sarah with their support. The mercantile owner's wife told her she wished she'd had Sarah's courage when her own husband died. The blacksmith, a widower himself, clapped Harrison on the shoulder and told him he was a lucky man. Slowly, the tide of opinion shifted from scandal to something more like admiration. In April, with the grass greening and the lambs frolicking in the pasture, Harrison asked her formally to marry him. They were standing by the creek that ran through her property, watching the water run high with snowmelt, and he went down on one knee in the mud without hesitation. "Sarah Calloway, I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" She looked down at him, this man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who had taught her that it was never too late to choose joy over fear. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in late May in the small church in Miles City, with the minister conducting the ceremony, despite his wife's pinched expression. Sarah wore a simple blue dress, not white because she was no bride in the traditional sense, and Harrison wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Tom and Samuel stood as witnesses, along with a handful of friends who had supported them through the gossip and doubt. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional, but when Harrison said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure, and when Sarah repeated the words back to him, she meant them with her whole heart. They exchanged plain gold bands, and the minister pronounced them husband and wife with more enthusiasm than Sarah had expected. Perhaps even he was moved by the sight of two people so clearly meant for each other. The reception was held at the ranch, among the lambing pens Harrison had built and the sheep that were Sarah's livelihood. Someone had strung up lanterns, and Tom had convinced a fiddle player from town to provide music. They danced in the yard while the sun set and the stars came out, brilliant and countless overhead. "Mrs. Grady," Harrison said, his arms around her waist as they swayed to the music. "How does that sound? Strange. Good strange." She rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. "I can't quite believe this is real. Believe it. You're stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates." He laughed and spun her, and she felt young in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with possibility. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Harrison moved his few belongings into the main house, and they learned each other's rhythms and habits. He liked to read in the evenings while she worked on her accounts. She discovered he couldn't cook to save his life, while he discovered she had a weakness for peppermint candy that she tried to hide. They argued over silly things and made up quickly, learning that disagreement didn't mean disaster, that love could encompass both passion and patience. Summer brought good weather and strong wool prices. The ranch prospered, and with Harrison's help, Sarah was able to expand the flock and make long-needed improvements to the property. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and Sarah marveled at how natural it felt to have a partner again, someone who shared both the labor and the decisions. In August, she realized she was late. At first, she dismissed it as nothing, stress or age or any number of explanations that didn't require acknowledgement. But when 2 months passed and certain other signs made themselves known, she could no longer deny what her body was telling her. She was pregnant. The realization hit her with the force of a stampede. She was 39 years old, nearly 40, an age when most women were finished with childbearing. The risks were real, the dangers significant. And yet beneath the fear was something else, a fierce, unexpected joy that she didn't quite know what to do with. She told Harrison on a cool September evening, the words stumbling out awkwardly as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm going to have a baby," she said, not looking at him. "I know we never discussed it. I know I'm probably too old and it's dangerous and you might not even want." He cut her off by pulling her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you serious?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Sarah, are you absolutely certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. We'll go to town tomorrow. First thing, we'll see the doctor and make sure everything's all right." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright with tears. "I can't believe it. I never dared hope for this. You're not upset?" "Upset?" "Sarah, this is the best news I've ever received in my life. You've already given me everything and now this." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, and she let herself cry against his shoulder, releasing months of fear and doubt and wondering whether she deserved this kind of happiness. The doctor in Miles City confirmed what Sarah already knew and gave her stern instructions about rest and proper nutrition. The pregnancy was considered high risk given her age, and he wanted to see her regularly through the coming months. Sarah agreed to everything, determined to do whatever was necessary to bring this child safely into the world. Word spread, as it always did in a small town, and the reactions were mixed. Some women clucked with concern and offered advice. Others seemed scandalized that a woman her age would attempt such a thing. Martha Henderson actually crossed the street to avoid speaking to Sarah outside the general store, which Sarah considered a blessing in disguise. Winter came again, and Sarah's belly grew round beneath her dresses. Harrison treated her like spun glass, constantly hovering and worrying until she finally had to tell him to stop before she lost her mind. They compromised. She would rest more and let him take on the heavier work, and he would stop trying to wrap her in cotton wool and treat her like an invalid. The baby moved inside her on Christmas Eve, a flutter like bird wings that made her gasp and reach for Harrison's hand. They sat together by the fire, his palm pressed to her stomach, waiting to feel it again. "What do you want to name her?" Sarah asked. "If it's a girl, you think it's a girl." "I do. Call it Mother's Intuition." Harrison thought for a moment. "What about Marguerite? After my grandmother, she was the kindest person I ever knew. Marguerite Grady." Sarah tried the name out, finding it fit perfectly. "I like it, and if it's a boy, we'll figure that out when we meet him. But I think you're right. I think she's a girl." The baby came in early March, 2 weeks before her due date, in the middle of a snowstorm that made fetching the doctor impossible. The midwife, Mrs. Chen, arrived just in time, her bag of supplies and years of experience the only thing standing between Sarah and disaster. The labor was long and brutal, hours of pain that blurred together into a single endless ordeal. Harrison stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand and letting her curse him with language that would have shocked them both under other circumstances. Mrs. Chen remained calm and competent, checking Sarah's progress and murmuring encouragement in her accented English. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came, emerging into the world with a lusty cry that announced her arrival to anyone within a mile. Mrs. Chen cleaned her efficiently and placed her on Sarah's chest, a squirming, red-faced bundle of outrage and new life. "A girl," Mrs. Chen confirmed unnecessarily. "Small but healthy. You did well, Mrs. Grady." Sarah looked down at her daughter, this impossible gift she'd never expected to receive, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. Marguerite had Harrison's gray eyes and a fuzz of dark hair, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around Sarah's thumb, Sarah felt every fear and doubt she'd ever carried dissolve into nothing. Harrison touched his daughter's cheek with one gentle finger, his face wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. "Hello, Marguerite," he whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The baby turned her head toward his voice, already knowing her father, and Sarah felt a peace settle over her that was deeper than anything she'd known since Robert's death. This was her family, built not from youth or conventional wisdom but from patience and courage, and the stubborn belief that love was possible at any age. Mrs. Chen stayed for 2 days, teaching Sarah how to nurse and checking to make sure both mother and baby were recovering properly. Tom and Samuel brought meals and congratulations, handling the ranch work so Harrison could stay close to his new family. Even Martha Henderson sent a gift, a beautifully crocheted baby blanket that suggested perhaps she was capable of kindness after all. Spring arrived properly, transforming the ranch into a riot of green and new lambs. Marguerite thrived, growing chubby and alert, her eyes following everything with intense curiosity. Sarah strapped her to her chest and went back to work, unwilling to be separated from her daughter for long. Harrison built a cradle that rocked smooth and even, carved with sheep and clouds and the Montana sky. On a warm evening in May, with Marguerite asleep in her cradle and the windows open to let in the sweet spring air, Sarah and Harrison sat on the porch as they had so many times before. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, this man who had refused to let her hide from happiness. "You remember what you said that first day?" she asked. "When I told you love was for younger women, I said I'd wait for you to get younger. I thought you were mocking me. I was being honest. You needed time to let go of all the reasons you'd built up for why we couldn't work. I figured if I was patient enough, you'd realize those reasons didn't matter." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad I was right. So am I." She watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I wasted so much time being afraid. You weren't ready. There's a difference. And now you're happy, we're happy, that's all that matters." Marguerite stirred in her cradle, making the small snuffling sounds that meant she'd wake hungry soon. Sarah went to her, lifting her daughter into her arms and settling into the rocking chair Harrison had placed on the porch for exactly this purpose. The baby latched on eagerly and Sarah rocked slowly, feeling the evening breeze on her face and the weight of perfect contentment in her arms. Harrison watched them, his expression soft in the fading light. "I love you, Sarah Grady." "I love you too." She smiled at him over their daughter's head. "Thank you for being patient with me, for seeing what I couldn't see. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but I'm glad I had you to help." The years that followed were good ones, marked by the steady rhythms of ranch life and the joy of watching Marguerite grow. She was a bright, active child, fearless around the sheep and endlessly curious about everything from why the sky was blue to how spiders made their webs. Sarah and Harrison raised her together, teaching her to ride and read and work hard, showing her by example what love looked like when it was built on respect and partnership. The gossip about their age difference eventually died down, replaced by other scandals and dramas. Martha Henderson even apologized to Sarah one Sunday after church, admitting that perhaps she had been too hasty in her judgment. Sarah accepted the apology graciously, having learned that holding grudges served no purpose beyond making herself bitter. Tom worked for them until his death at 72, succumbing peacefully in his sleep one winter night. They buried him on the ranch he'd helped build, with a headstone that read, "Faithful Friend." Samuel stayed on, eventually marrying a widow from town and bringing her to live in a small house Harrison built for them on the property. When Marguerite was 5, Sarah realized she was pregnant again, a surprise that shocked them both. Harrison was nearly 33 now, Sarah just past 44, and this time the doctor was even more concerned. But Sarah had learned something about courage over the years, and she carried this pregnancy with the same determined faith that had brought Marguerite safely into the world. Samuel arrived in July, a big, healthy boy with his mother's dark hair and a temperament as sunny as a summer day. Marguerite was delighted with her baby brother, helping to care for him with the serious dedication of a 5-year-old who'd been given an important responsibility. The ranch continued to prosper, growing from Sarah's modest operation into one of the most successful sheep ranches in Montana Territory. Harrison proved to have a gift for business, negotiating fair prices and establishing relationships with buyers that ensured steady income. Together, they built something that would last, a legacy to pass on to their children. Montana became a state in 1889, the same year they'd met, and by the time Marguerite turned 16 in 1905, the world was changing in ways both exciting and unsettling. Automobiles appeared on the streets of Miles City, electricity came to the town, and there was talk of telephones and other marvels. But on the ranch, The fundamental work remained the same: tending sheep, fixing fences, preparing for the endless cycle of seasons. Sarah was 55 by then, her hair fully silver, her face deeply lined by sun and time. Harrison was 43, still strong and capable, his devotion to her as steady as it had been that first day when he'd tipped his hat and told her he'd wait for her to get younger. They sat on the porch one evening, watching Marguerite help her brother with the sheep, their children working together with easy cooperation. Sarah reached for Harrison's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying someone so much older? Missing out on things you might have had with someone younger?" He looked at her with those gray eyes that still made her heart skip, even after 16 years of marriage. "Sarah Grady, I have spent nearly half my life loving you, and every single day has been exactly what I wanted. We've built a ranch, raised 2 incredible children, and created something real and lasting together. What could I possibly regret? Gray hair and wrinkles, beauty and character." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You're still the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Age doesn't change that. You're biased, completely, proudly." He pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting there perfectly as she always had. "When I told you I'd wait for you to get younger, I meant it, but not the way you thought. I meant I'd wait for you to stop letting age define what you deserved, to stop hiding behind it like a shield. You were never too old, Sarah. You just needed to believe you were worth loving. And now you know it. You've always known it, really. You just had to stop being afraid." Marguerite called out a question about moving the flock, and Harrison went to help, leaving Sarah alone on the porch with her thoughts and memories. She thought about the woman she'd been when they met, lonely and certain her life was finished, convinced that love was a country she'd already visited and could never return to. She thought about Harrison's patience, his stubborn refusal to let her hide, the way he'd shown her through 1,000 small actions that age was just a number and love had no expiration date. The sun set in a glory of orange and purple, and Sarah watched her family work together in the fading light. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not youth or beauty or any of the things Martha Henderson and the gossips had worried about, but this: partnership and purpose, laughter and hard work, children who knew they were loved, and a husband who had never once made her feel anything less than cherished. Harrison came back to the porch, dusting off his hands. "Sheep are settled. Kids are arguing about whose turn it is to feed the dog. Let them figure it out. That was my thought." He settled beside her, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, countless and bright in the big Montana sky. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "For what? For waiting, for being patient, for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to figure it out alone." They sat there as darkness fell completely, wrapped in each other's arms and the life they'd built together, proof that love could bloom at any age for anyone brave enough to let it in. The sheep settled in their pens, the children finished their chores and headed inside, and the ranch that had once been Sarah's solitary fortress became a home filled with love and laughter, and the certain knowledge that sometimes the best things in life come when you're finally ready to receive them, regardless of the number of years you've already lived. Years later, when people asked Sarah about her marriage, she always told them the same thing: that Harrison had seen past her fear to the woman underneath, that he'd taught her it was never too late to choose happiness, and that the best decision she'd ever made was saying yes when he asked her to marry him. And if they pressed her about the age difference, about whether it had been difficult or caused problems, she would smile and shake her head and say that love had never once asked for her birth date, only for her heart. Harrison lived to see his grandchildren, 3 beautiful babies born to Marguerite and her husband, a rancher from the next county who loved her with the same steady devotion Harrison had shown Sarah. Samuel married at 23, bringing home a schoolteacher who fit into the family as though she'd always been there. The ranch passed to the next generation, and the one after that, each adding their own touches while maintaining the foundation Sarah and Harrison had built. Sarah died at 72 in her sleep, with Harrison holding her hand. He followed her 6 months later, unable or unwilling to continue without her, and they were buried side by side on the ranch they'd built together, under a sky as big and blue as the day they'd met. On their shared headstone, their children had inscribed a simple truth that summed up everything they'd been to each other. Love knows no season. And underneath, in smaller letters, she told him love was for younger women. The cowboy said, "Then I'll wait for you to get younger." He did, and she did, and together they proved that the heart knows nothing of age, only of connection, courage, and the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let fear win.